Over the last couple of months, I've conducted research into using colour and art mediums to tell a metaphorical story. I then created a 1-minute experimental short film. So without further ado, here is my experimental short, Hanahaki. Hanahaki was inspired by the book Chromatopoeia, An Illustrated History of Colour, the Netflix series Maniac, and the song Choking on Flowers by Fox Academy. Chromatopoeia is basically a book about making paint, but on one particular page there was paint in water, and the effect of it just looked so stunning and cloud-like. The use of colour can be very symbolic, so I really just wanted to explore that a bit more. The Netflix series Maniac also inspired me because of its use of colour. It uses a lot of vibrant colours to express emotion to the audience. Choking on Flowers by Fox Academy is a song that can be interpreted in many ways. Looking at many contributions on the Genius Lyrics website, I found a couple possible explanations as to the meaning of the song. One person says, a possible interpretation of the song, especially its title, is that the song explores the fictional Chinese disease called Hanahaki. Hanahaki makes the victim who experiences unrequited love suffer by choking up flowers. This really inspired me because looking at Chromatopoeia, the way the ink was in water, it looked very flower-like and very flexible, and that would really tie into the song, and the use of colour I found would really serve the story the best way in terms of conveying emotion to the audience without necessarily even having characters, and just experimenting that way. I researched online about colour connotation and used the book The Visual Story, Creating the Visual Structure of Film, TV and Digital Media, which goes in depth about the colour wheel and contrasting colours. I had a look on the internet for other practitioners which had done something similar, and there was a YouTube channel called Macro Room who basically did injecting ink into like a fish tank. It was just purely for the spectacle and much less for like a story or a metaphorical meaning, but it was very stunning as they did use a lot of slow motion and their range of colours was just so broad. This gave me an idea of how to actually carry out my experiment in terms of what equipment to use, what paint to use. Now I wanted to tie my experimental back to the Choking on Flowers song and the whole meaning behind that. So I went back to research about Hanahaki. It said that the disease is only cured when someone else returns the feeling of love, or that the infection could be removed through surgery. However, if they didn't choose any of these routes, then their lungs would eventually fill up with flowers and they'd suffocate. So it really gave me the idea of being around someone or loving someone even though they don't love you back, or putting yourself in a situation just because you love someone even if it gets you hurt. So I kind of thought about those emotions and the colours that really connotate that emotion. This ties back to Maniac, as in that show, they kind of take drugs to get over their trauma and confront things. And this really ties into this, even though you love something, it hurts you. Through my research online and using the visual storybook, I found that the colour red often connotates love or friendship, and the colour black often connotates evil, death, and mystery. This was really interesting because not only would I be able to express emotion through the music and the colour, but the medium that I was using itself is so flexible in water that it really just gave me the idea of this evil disease engulfing the love that someone had, but they're not getting it in return. I feel that not only the colour and the paint itself is symbolic, I feel the water is as well, as the body is made up of 60% of water. It really just enforces the idea of flowers being inside the liquid, or in this case inside the body, as the afflicted does throw up flowers. From all my research, I felt that using colour, water and the music would really help serve the story and really tie back into the idea of disease through love and hurting for the sake of love, even though ultimately taking over you in a sense. The ink in the water kind of made that weird weed flower shape. You obviously get rid of weed flowers in your garden because they try and compete with the other flowers for nutrients, which is much like a disease taking your normal life away and taking over the body. So in terms of shots for my experimental, I was thinking a lot about the cinematography and the composition. Looking at practitioners online, especially a lot of them being from YouTube channels, they do tend to use a macro lens. But to serve the story, because I not only didn't use actual humans or have any emotion that way, I felt that having kind of wide shots, not necessarily massively wide shots, just close-ups as opposed to like a macro lens with extreme close-ups, I feel like it really adds to the isolation of just that one-way relationship or that one-way giving of love. The ink is centered in the middle and there's a lot of space around them, which really just adds a coolness to the scene, which creates a lot of contrast between obviously the red ink in the middle, and it really just spaces that emotion in the centre from everything else, which I think is quite unconventional for this kind of video. But as it is an experimental, that was pretty much my intention. As much as I broke conventions with some of the shots for my experimental, I did want to also create that juxtaposition of the unrequited love eventually turning into a disease. So obviously we have the two colours, the red and the black. I decided to pour one of the colours on one side and one on the other, but they kind of all just engulfed into one, and obviously that was really handy because, as I said before, using the medium that I was using, it's so flexible, and it really just gives the idea that this disease is just engulfing the person with unrequited love, and without even having any actors or faces or whatever. I feel like that emotion is very clear with the soundtrack as well. To actually carry out my experiment, I did use a glass bowl and I kept 2 cups of different coloured paint near me at all times so that I could just pour in whenever I want to. I used my DSLR 1200D to film this, and I used an 18-55 lens as its standard just to create that isolation again, just having those more close-up as opposed to extreme close-ups. I still got a lot of the detail in, which I'm really pleased about obviously, but you can really just see the amount of ink and it really just flowing and using all the space. From this experiment I learnt that the flexibility of paint in water makes for a very expressive way of storytelling. I feel that less is more, and colour does a great way of conveying emotion. I feel that I've improved on taking the time to think about the story that I'm trying to tell and planning my shots in terms of theory to be able to further develop my skills in this field. I probably would use a macro lens in the future just to really get close up on all the details. I would have liked to have had more light coming through the bowl. So if I were to do it again, I'd probably do it outside as opposed to just by the window. Although the light wasn't always that great, I still feel like it did give depth to the ink. Overall, I really did enjoy this experiment. It was fun just throwing ink into a tub and using different art mediums. It was really insightful, and just finding out how much more there was to Choking on Flowers. You know, it's such a calm sounding song, but there's so much juxtaposition there. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Goodbye.